My name is Rachel Morgan, and I'm 41 years old. The last time my family laid eyes on me, I was standing in the middle of our driveway in Savannah, Georgia, with two uniformed officers twisting my arms behind my back. It was 8 years ago, but I remember every single second like it's frozen in amber. It was early evening in late spring. The air was thick with that humid Georgia heaviness, the kind that makes your hair stick to your neck and your shirt cling to your back. Magnolia blossoms drooped over the fence, filling the air with sweetness that somehow made the moment feel even more surreal. Across the street, Mrs. Carmichael stood watering her hydrangeas, her eyes locked on me like she'd just tuned into the juiciest episode of her favorite TV drama. The flashing red and blue lights bounced off the white siding of my parents' house. I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the patrol car window, wide eyes, flushed cheeks, a mix of disbelief and something else I didn't want to name yet, hurt. On the porch, my mother stood stiff as a statue, arms crossed, lips pressed so tightly together they were nearly white. My father was beside her, his hand on the railing, his jaw clenched in that way it always was when he was about to say something he knew would cut deep. Then he said it. "You're no daughter of mine." That sentence hit harder than the cold steel of the handcuffs. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even said with anger, just quiet, steady finality. Like a verdict that had been deliberated on for years and finally delivered. The officers didn't pause. They led me down the walkway, gravel crunching under my boots, past the neighbors who had drifted onto their lawns for a better look. A few of them whispered to each other. Others just stared openly, drinking it all in. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I knew better than to blow my cover. And yes, even in that humiliating moment, that was my priority. But the ache in my chest was real. I had spent my entire life thinking that my family might not always agree with me, but that they'd at least believe in me. That night taught me otherwise. The whole thing had started less than an hour earlier when my older brother, Justin, called the police. He told them his sister, me, was high on something, unstable, and a danger to the kids and the family. It was a lie so bold it might have been laughable if it wasn't so devastating. The police arrived fast, sirens screaming down our quiet cul-de-sac. Justin was the first to greet them, shaking hands like they were old friends. He put on his concerned brother face, the same one he'd used to charm teachers, neighbors, girlfriends, and eventually, our parents. He was a born performer, and he knew exactly how to sell his version of the story. And my parents? They didn't even ask for mine. Mom's eyes flicked from Justin to me and back again, and I could see it, the decision forming in real time. She believed him. Dad didn't hesitate either. When the officers asked if they could take me in, he gave a single nod, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. The ride to the county jail felt like hours, even though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. The two officers in the front talked quietly about the Braves game, completely indifferent to the life they were appending in the back seat. I kept my gaze fixed on the streaks of light sliding past the window, reminding myself to breathe evenly. This was all part of the job. Part of the job, I repeated in my head like a mantra. 3 days later, the charges were dropped, no explanation given. My family never asked why. Never wondered how their supposedly drug-addicted daughter was suddenly free. They just moved on, folding my absence into the family narrative like a missing stitch in an old quilt. I became the whispered cautionary tale. The name that came up over Christmas dinner only in pitying tones, a poor Rachel, so much potential, and she threw it all away. Justin played the part of the heartbroken brother perfectly. I'd heard from old family friends how he'd shake his head sadly and say, I just wish she'd get help. We all do. He was so convincing that sometimes, on sleepless nights, even I almost believed his act. But here's what no one knew, not my mother, not my father, not even the cousins I'd once trusted with my secrets. I wasn't strung out. I wasn't lost. I wasn't spiraling. I was deep, deep undercover. 18 months inside a methamphetamine distribution network that stretched from the back alleys of Miami to the warehouses of New Orleans. Under the arrest my family had witnessed. That was a meticulously planned part of my cover story, designed to cement my credibility with the people I was trying to take down. The cruelest part? I couldn't tell them. Not then, not for years. And so, in their eyes, I stopped being Rachel Morgan, daughter, sister, friend, and became a stranger wearing my face. The truth is simpler than the rumors ever were. I wasn't falling apart. I was falling in. Deeper than anyone imagined. By the time those handcuffs clicked shut in our Savannah driveway, I was 18 months into a DEA undercover assignment with a cover identity that could withstand a hurricane of scrutiny. Fake rap sheet. Real burner phones. A storage unit full of nothing that looked like everything. Every piece built to survive the kind of casual questions families ask over pot roast, and the kind of dangerous questions criminals ask over guns. We called the Operation Sundorg, the kind of bright phenomenon that appears when the air is cold enough and the light is at just the wrong angle. My handler, ASAC Porter, loved the name. He'd say, people will stare right at a Sundorg and swear they saw two suns. That's what a good cover does. He had a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss," and he drank out of it like it was scripture. My partner on the street side was Agent Sarah Lee, all calm eyes and steadier hands. Sarah could assemble a takedown plan with the same quiet grace other people use to fold laundry. We spoke in shorthand. We counted seconds the same way. We trusted the other to have a plan B that didn't need explaining. She knew the handcuffed daughter at the curb was theater. She also knew the pain on my face wasn't. To sell the fall would let my cover fray in public, missed birthdays, late-night appearances at the wrong bars, a frenzy whose tattoos told longer stories than their words. We planted whispers in all the places whispers thrive: the laundromat, the diner counter at 2 a.m., the EMT who had noticed something off, at the school mom who saw me nodding off in a parking lot. Each lie carefully placed, each rumor watered just enough to grow. You'd be surprised how fast a myth blooms when it confirms what people already suspect. The network I'd slid into operated like a traveling carnival, never in one place too long, always cash only, always someone smiling at the front, someone bleeding in the back. We traced the precursor chemicals from shipping yards near New Orleans to Cinderblurky vitamin warehouses outside Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and watched the finished crystal migrate to club districts in Miami with the same regularity as snowbirds in December. Some days I was a courier. Other days I was a ghost who listened better than she spoke. Every day I was a ledger, keeping quiet track of names, nicknames, vehicles, habits, handles, tells. My cover name was Ray Monroe, short, sharp, forgettable in a crowd. Ray worked odd jobs. Ray paid in cash. Ray had a suspended license in a state that wasn't hers and a sister who wouldn't return calls, my real phone routed to a silent voicemail tree. Ray knew the difference between iodine stains and nicotine. Ray didn't ask questions she couldn't survive the answers to. The staged arrest was designed to harden Ray's edges. People in that world trust two kinds of stories, one backed by money and one backed by scars. Money I could fake. Scars, less so. Being cuffed in front of your family will put a mark on a person you can't see but everyone feels. It made me believable. It also made me the kind of lonely that radiates. I kept 2 apartments. One was a sanitized showbox off Victory Drive where I slept for hours at a time and kept a Bible my mother had given me when I graduated the academy, pressed jasmine still tucked at Sarms. The other was a flop space over a closed tire shop 2 counties away, where Ray stored 2 duffel bags and a gas station hoodie that always smelled like old coffee and motor oil. In one refrigerator, labeled meal prep, stacked neat. In the other, bodega eggs, a half-squeezed lime, and a note to myself taped behind the crisper drawer, "You are Rachel. Don't forget which way is home." Every undercover learns the same arithmetic. Time plus fear equals mistakes. The trick is making sure the mistakes belong to the people you're chasing. We'd been circling a distribution lieutenant called Dr. Blue, not a doctor, barely blue, but fond of nitrile gloves and poetic threats. He managed the flow up the coast, and he loved men who had families and something to lose. They were reliable until they weren't. That was the bitter irony. While I was risking my badge and my life to cauterize a wound spreading across 3 states, Justin, my parents' favorite storybook son, was busy auditioning for the very role I was hunting. He started small, skimming prescription pads at the clinic where he was a tech, selling to college kids who thought homework demanded another pill. Then he got bold. The lake house in North Carolina, the one with cedar siding and a dock where we jumped barefoot into water so cold it hurt, became a place that smelled wrong. Bleach. Cat urine. Metal. I knew those smells before I let myself admit it. I didn't want to believe it, but the numbers wouldn't stop whispering. My surveillance logs showed a pattern of late-night trips. The power company records showed irregular spikes. Trail cameras we tucked into the Pines Court trunks sagging under boxes marked water filtration that never went near a faucet. And a drone pass, lawful, quiet, routine, caught a gloved hand cracking a door just enough to let out a ribbon of chemical haze. I kept waiting for my mind to offer a gentler explanation. It didn't. When we finally tied the lake house to Blue's supply chain, receipts for red phosphorus from a business in Baton Rouge, cash transfers in just under the reporting threshold amounts from burner banks in South Florida, Porter called a meeting in a windowless room that always smelled like printer toner. He slid a stack of photos toward me and watched my face the way surgeons watch heart monitors. "Tell me what you see," he said. "I see a lab," I answered. "I see poor ventilation. I see risk to the water table. I see a family home becoming a crime scene." I held his gaze. "And I see my brother." Silence settled like dust. Porter exhaled slowly. "Then we do this by the book, Agent Morgan. Clean warrants. Clean chain of custody. Clean edges. No one gets to say we rushed it because it's yours." Sarah's boot tapped once under the table, a code we used for "I'm here." Out loud, she asked for timelines, for tech, for air support if Blue decided to write an epilogue with bullets. Her voice was steady. Mine tried to be. That night, I drove by my parents' house and parked a block away, windows down, letting the crickets braid themselves into a kind of lullaby. Through the open kitchen shades, I could see my mother stirring something on the stove, my father reaching for salt. Ordinary, domestic, undeservedly peaceful. A part of me wanted to walk up the steps, ring the bell, and say everything out loud. Another part of me, the part that knows how operations die, kept my hands a 10 and 2 and my mouth shut. Instead, I texted Sarah, "When it breaks, it's going to break loud." She replied, "Then let's choose the day and the volume." We did. We chose their 40th anniversary, a day when everyone we needed to protect would be in one place, and everyone we needed to arrest would assume I'd never show my face. Blue liked pageantry. So did Justin. If a storm had to come, I wanted the sky full of witnesses. In the weeks leading up to it, I lived in increments: 6-minute burner calls, 9-word messages, 30-second glances over my shoulder in case paranoia was patience in disguise. I filed more reports than sleep hours, taught myself to eat when the clock said so, not when my body remembered hunger. I stopped trying to explain the ache in my chest. I named a purpose and let it sit there. On the morning the warrants came through, the clerk's stamp hit the paper with a thunk that felt like a gavel. I signed where I needed to sign. Sarah checked her vest straps. Porter clasped my shoulder, the closest thing to tenderness he allowed on duty. "You sure you can do this?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm going to." Outside, the Savannah heat was already starting to rise, gluing shirts to backs, making the air itself feel like a weight you carried. I slid behind the wheel of an unmarked SUV, stared at my reflection in the rear view. No visible scars, but the invisible ones steady as constellations, and whispered the only prayer I trust before a storm. Let truth root deeper than lies. Let justice be clean. Let me remember who I am and who I'm not. The morning of my parents' 40th anniversary was the kind of warm Savannah day that tricks you into thinking nothing bad can happen. The sunlight poured through Spanish moss, and the air smelled faintly of salt from the river. People were setting up white tents in the backyard of my parents' house, long tables draped with linen, floral centerpieces already in place. It was exactly the kind of family gathering I'd been avoiding for 8 years, and exactly where I needed to be. By 3:15 p.m., I was in the passenger seat of an unmarked black SUV, 3 more DEA tactical vehicles trailing behind us. Agent Sarah Lee drove, sunglasses hiding her eyes, but her jaw was tight. "You sure about this?" she asked, even though she knew the answer. I checked my service weapon, ran a hand over the Velcro of my tactical vest, and pulled my DEA windbreaker snug. "I've been sure for 8 years, I said. When we rolled up, the party was in full swing. Through the sliding glass doors I saw my brother, Justin Morgan, holding court at the head table, glass of champagne in hand, telling a story that had everyone laughing. His smile hadn't changed since the night he called the police on me, smug, effortless, and as fake as the Rolex on his wrist. We stepped out of the SUV. I led the team through the side gate into the backyard. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. My cousin Molly dropped her wine glass, the sound of shattering crystal punctuating the sudden silence. My mother was the first to react. "Rachel," she whispered, as if she were seeing a ghost. My father's face was unreadable, but his knuckles whitened around the arm of his chair. Justin spread his arms in mock surprise. Well, look who finally decided to join us, and in costume, no less. What are you supposed to be, sis? Some kind of cop?" Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. I pulled out my badge, holding it so the sunlight caught the gold. Special Agent Rachel Morgan. DEA. Badge number 2847. And yes, Justin, I am some kind of cop. The crowd didn't laugh this time. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. I spoke clearly, every word meant to carry. For the last 18 months, I've been investigating a methamphetamine distribution network operating out of this county. That investigation resulted in the arrest of 17 individuals this morning, the seizure of 43 pounds of crystal meth, and over $200,000 in drug proceeds. I turned toward my parents. The primary manufacturing site was a property at 412 Lakeshore Road. I let the pores hang. Your lake house. Gasps rippled through the guests. My father tried to stand, but Sarah's hand on his shoulder kept him in place. I faced my brother. Justin Morgan, you are under arrest for manufacturing and distributing controlled substances, money laundering, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. His smile faltered, but he tried to recover. Rachel, I don't know what game you're. Save it, I cut in, nodding to Sarah. She snapped the cuffs onto his wrists while reading him his rights. I looked around at the stunned faces. 8 years ago, Justin called the police and told you all I was dangerous. You believed him. What you didn't know was that I was deep undercover, risking my life to take down a cartel. I couldn't tell you, not without putting dozens of lives at risk. But Justin knew what he was doing. He was already dealing pills back then, and he needed me out of the way. Justin was silent now, the charm drained from his face. Sarah approached, holding a thick folder. Property seizure documents, as she said loud enough for everyone to hear. The lake house, 3 vehicles, and all financial assets tied to the drug operation will be seized under federal asset forfeiture laws. I took the folder and flipped it open so my parents could see the official seals. The house will be uninhabitable. Meth production leaves toxic contamination behind. Even if you could afford cleanup, it's not worth it. My father's voice broke for the first time. We'll lose the house? Almost certainly, I said. But you'll both be giving statements confirming you had no knowledge of the illegal activity. My mother reached for my arm. Rachel, please, can we talk privately? 8 years ago, that same hand had slapped me across the face when I tried to explain the truth. I gently pulled free. I'm needed elsewhere. Behind me, my father's voice cracked. We failed you. I didn't turn around. Yes. You did. The team led Justin toward the SUV, his expensive shirt wrinkled, his perfect hair out of place. 8 years of his lies had just crumbled in 10 minutes, and I wasn't finished yet. Justin's arrest didn't just end the party, it detonated it. Guests who'd been sipping champagne minutes earlier were now whispering, pulling out phones, and stepping away from the tables as if the crime might somehow be contagious. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread hung heavy in the air, but no one was eating. I stayed where I was, feet planted in the middle of the lawn. My badge still caught the sunlight, the windbreaker stretched across my shoulders. If anyone had doubted my authority when I walked in, they didn't now. You all should know something, I said, my voice carrying over the low hum of shocked conversations. While you've spent 8 years mourning the daughter you thought was lost to drugs, your golden boy was becoming exactly what you feared I had become. The difference is, I was fighting the war on drugs. Justin was profiting from it. A few people looked away, embarrassed. Others stared at me, wide-eyed. My mother's tears were slow now, her makeup streaked down her cheeks. My father had his head bowed, one hand covering his mouth like he was trying to keep his own words from spilling out. Agent Sarah reappeared, walking with that calm, efficient stride she always had, even when the tension was thick enough to choke on. His secure, She said simply. But I wasn't finished. As part of our investigation, I continued, we've recovered financial records showing Justin's been stealing from his employer, Memorial Medical Group, for 3 years. His boss has already been contacted and is cooperating with federal investigators. That one hit my father like a punch. His shoulders collapsed, his frame shaking as he let out a roar, broken sob. The sound made a few guests flinch. My mother reached for him, her own face frozen in disbelief. I could have stopped. I could have walked away right there, let the shock do its work. But 8 years of betrayal and silence burned too deep. 8 years ago, you chose to believe Justin without a single question, I said, my gaze fixed on my parents. You never asked if there might be another explanation. You never considered that maybe, just maybe, the truth wasn't as simple as it looked. You chose the easy lie over the hard truth. I saw it land. My father's eyes met mine for the first time that day. There was nothing left of the man who told me I was no daughter of his. I had to keep my cover. I went on. That arrest you watched from your porch? It was part of the operation. I was infiltrating one of the most dangerous meth networks in the Southeast. If you'd known anything, if you'd guessed, it could have compromised everything. And Justin knew that. That's why he set me up. He wanted me discredited before I could get too close to the truth. The silence in the backyard wasn't just awkward anymore, it was heavy. Sarah handed me another document, which I flipped open and read aloud for everyone to hear. Per federal asset forfeiture laws, the following will be seized: the Lake House property, registered vehicles under Justin Morgan's name, and all bank accounts connected to the illegal enterprise. I closed the folder. I'll need statements from you both confirming you didn't know about the illegal activity. Sarah will arrange the interviews. When I turned to leave, my mother caught my arm again. Her grip was tighter this time, desperate. Rachel, please. We didn't know. I looked down at her hand, then at her face, the same face that had been cold and unreadable 8 years ago when she'd watched the police take me away. No, I said quietly. You didn't ask. Sarah's voice came from behind me, crisp and professional. Agent Morgan, time to go. I pulled free and followed her toward the SUVs. As I walked, I heard my father's voice, roar, hoarse, and unguarded. We failed you. Oh God, Rachel, we failed you. I didn't turn around. For a fraction of a second, I was that little girl again, running to my dad when I scraped my knee, expecting him to make it all better. But then I remembered the look in his eyes when he'd said I wasn't his daughter, and the moment passed. Yes, I said without looking back. You did. The door of the SUV closed behind me with a solid, final click. Sarah slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine without a word. I stared out the window at the neighborhood I'd grown up in, streets that had felt like the whole world when I was a kid, now just another place on the map. You okay? She asked after a long minute. Yeah, I said, and to my surprise, I meant it. We drove away, the black SUVs disappearing around the corner. Behind us, the party was over, the perfect image of our family shattered beyond repair. And ahead of me, for the first time in 8 years, the road felt clear. 3 weeks after the raid, I stood in the hallway of the federal courthouse, staring at the closed double doors of courtroom 4B. Inside, my brother was being sentenced. I didn't go in. I didn't need to hear the formalities or see the finality inked into the record. I already knew the outcome: 15 years in federal prison, no chance of parole before 12. While Justin was trading tailored suits for a khaki jumpsuit, the lake house was condemned. Environmental Services declared it uninhabitable, its walls saturated with toxic residue from years of meth production. The demolition crew sent me photographs: the dock where we'd once fished with our grandfather, the cedar siding my father had varnished every spring, the windows where my mother hung her lace curtains, all splintered and collapsing under the claw of an excavator. My parents didn't watch the demolition. They didn't have to. They felt every blow in their bank account. Most of their life savings went to legal fees for Justin, then to futile cleanup costs before the government took possession. By the time the case closed, their accounts were nearly empty. I wasn't around to see it firsthand. When sentencing day came, I was already in Columbia, South Carolina, knee-deep in another case, a fentanyl pipeline running from the port of Charleston to college campuses upstate. I'd always believed in forward motion, in keeping your eyes on the next target instead of the last battle. But the letters started coming almost immediately. The first one arrived at the DEA field office 2 weeks after the raid. I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly: neat, looping, the way she used to label the mason jars of homemade peach jam. I set the envelope on the corner of my desk and left it there for 3 days before I opened it. Inside was a 3-page apology. She wrote about how she and my father had convinced themselves they were protecting the family when they turned their backs on me. She said she believed Justin because believing me would have meant admitting they'd failed as parents. She told me she hadn't slept through a single night since the raid. She also told me about the silence at the dinner table now, how my father barely spoke unless spoken to her, how the family friends who used to stop by no longer called. She said she wanted a chance to make it right. I didn't write back. Every 2 or 3 weeks, another letter would come. Some were long, filled with memories of my childhood, trips to Tybee Island, the night I made my first arrest as a rookie cop, the time I'd broken my arm falling out of the neighbor's tree. Others were short, just a few lines asking how I was, telling me she was thinking of me. I read the first few lines of each one, then filed them in a manila folder in my desk drawer. I didn't need to reread the same regret in different words. Regret, after all, is easy. Trust is hard. And trust was what they'd broken. In the weeks after Justin's sentencing, I found myself replaying that day in the backyard, but not the part where the DEA SUVs rolled up. Instead, I kept seeing my father's face in the split second after I said a yes, you did hear to his apology. The expression was something between loss and recognition, as if he'd just realized the weight of what those 8 years had cost us both. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if I'd ever let them back in. The truth was, I didn't know. Some betrayals cut so deep that they leave a scar you can't see but feel every time you move. Meanwhile, work went on. My new case consumed my days and most of my nights. I drove the highways between Charleston and Columbia so often that I started recognizing the patterns in the truck traffic, the faces at the all-night diners. My team became my family in a way my real one hadn't been for years, people who didn't need me to explain my choices, who trusted me without proof because we'd already saved each other's lives in the field. I told Sarah once, over late-night takeout at the office, that the raid at my parents' had been the most satisfying moment of my career. She didn't even blink. That's because it wasn't just a bust, she said. It was closure. I wasn't so sure. Closure implies something is finished. This didn't feel finished. It felt quieter. And maybe quiet was enough. But every time I walked into the field office and saw that manila folder in my drawer, I knew the door wasn't locked forever. Just closed. For now. Because if there's one thing going undercover teaches you, it's patience. And I had learned to wait for the right moment better than anyone. The drive back to the field office that night was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand filling. Sarah glanced at me in the rearview mirror once or twice, probably weighing whether to break the silence. She didn't. She understood the value of letting someone sit with their thoughts. As we passed out of the neighborhood and onto the highway, I watched the familiar landmarks fall away. The gas station where I'd bought candy as a kid, the faded billboard for a seafood restaurant my parents took us to every summer, the stretch of marshland that always caught the evening light like liquid gold. For 8 years, I'd avoided these sights. Now, looking at them again, I felt detached. They weren't my home anymore. They were coordinates on a map, nothing more. At the office, I unloaded my gear, locked my service weapon, and hung my DEA windbreaker in my locker. The ritual felt grounding, a signal to my brain that I could step out of the role for a few hours. But the truth was, I didn't have much of a life outside the badge anymore. My apartment was tidy, functional, and impersonal. I could be gone for days or weeks without worrying about plants dying or pets needing care. It used to bother me, the emptiness of it. Now I saw it as freedom. My real family wasn't the people whose blood I shared, it was the people who'd taken bullets in my stead, the ones who'd run toward the sound of gunfire without hesitation because they knew I'd be running with them. Sarah was one of them. So was Porter, my ASAC. Even the younger agents, like Ramirez and Cho, who still carried that edge of rookie eagerness, were becoming part of that chosen circle. We knew each other's tells, when someone needed backup without asking, when someone was covering for a bad night's sleep, when someone needed a joke at the right moment to break the tension before a raid. That was the family I trusted. The next morning, I was at my desk by 6:30. Sorting through intel on a fentanyl distribution ring we'd been tracking for months. Sarah came in with 2 coffees and dropped one onto my desk without a word. I took a sip and nearly smiled. She remembered I liked it black, no sugar, no cream. Small things matter in this job. Around noon, Porter called me into his office. He leaned back in his chair, studying me the way he does when he's deciding whether to hand me something explosive. Got a new lead, he said, sliding a thin folder across the desk. Potential connection to the port of Charleston shipments. I want you and Sarah on it. I glanced at the folder but didn't open it. You sure you want me back in the field so soon after? Yes, he cut in, voice firm. You're good at compartmentalizing. You don't sit and stew, you move. This is how you work through things. He wasn't wrong. As I walked back to my desk, I caught Sarah watching me from across the bullpen. She didn't ask what Porter had said, she just gave me a slight nod. We'd be back in the field together soon. That night, after hours of combing through shipping manifests, surveillance photos, and wiretap transcripts, I drove home under a sky that was clear for the first time in days. I thought about my parents, about the letters I still wasn't answering, and about Justin, sitting in a cell somewhere, trading favors for respect in a world with its own brutal rules. Part of me wanted to believe that time could change things. That one day I'd read a letter from my mother and feel ready to respond. But I wasn't there yet. And maybe I never would be. Because the truth I'd learned, the one that had taken 8 years, a staged arrest, and a family implosion to hammer into me, was that you don't need someone's love or approval to be whole. You don't even need their understanding. What you need is to know who you are when the noise falls away. For me, that was a DEA special agent who'd made peace with the fact that some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Who'd found loyalty, trust, and even love in the most unlikely places, in briefing rooms, in bulletproof vests, in the quiet exchanges before a breach. My last thought before I fell asleep that night was simple. I might have lost the family I was born into, but I built one in its place. And this time, I knew it would hold. 2 days later, Sarah and I were sitting in an unmarked SUV on a narrow street just outside the Charleston waterfront. The late afternoon heat made the air shimmer above the blacktop, and the tang of saltwater mixed with the sharp scent of diesel from the port cranes. From our vantage point, we had a clear view of a weathered warehouse, its faded lettering barely legible, Atlantic Marine Imports. According to the file Porter had given me, this place was more than a shipping hub. It was a funnel, containers arriving from overseas with legitimate goods up front, but hidden deep in the manifest, tucked in false compartments, was enough fentanyl to poison entire cities. We were waiting on a local informant known only as a Crow. He'd agreed to meet us in person, which told me he was either desperate or reckless. In this business, the line between the two is almost invisible. Sarah tapped the steering wheel lightly, her version of pacing. Crow's late. He'll show, EI said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. 5 minutes later, a lanky man in a sweat-stained baseball cap approached from the alley. His eyes flicked over the SUV twice before he came to the passenger side. I unlocked the door, and he slid in, smelling faintly of motor oil and fear. They're moving it tomorrow night, E. Crow said without preamble. Half-ton shipment. Comes in on the Green Falcon out of Veracruz. Manifest says textile machinery. How's it getting out? I asked. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. Hidden panels in the machinery crates. They load it straight onto 2 box trucks, take the north route. No checkpoints, no stops. Sarah glanced at me, already seeing the same problem I did. A moving target on an open road is a nightmare to intercept cleanly. Names? I pressed. Crow hesitated. One of the drivers, maybe both, works for a guy called Doc Blue. The name hit me like static in my chest. Blue had been part of the meth network I'd infiltrated years ago. He'd escaped the bust by disappearing before we had enough evidence to tie him directly to production. Seeing his name again felt like a loose thread pulling tight. You sure? I asked. Crow nodded. I've heard it 3 times now. Same guy. Gloves, clean cut, smiles like he knows more than you. I jotted the details in my notebook, though the image in my mind was already sharp. Blue had a way of making you think you were in control right up until you realized you weren't. When Crow left, Sarah started the engine, pulling us into the light evening traffic. If Blue's back in the game, this isn't just a bust, as she said. It's a chance to finish something. Yeah, EI said quietly. And this time, we finish it. Back at the field office, the planning began in earnest. Porter brought in a small team, people we trusted implicitly, and we spent hours in the briefing room, mapping routes, reviewing aerial photos, running through contingencies. Every plan included layers, primary, backup, and the if everything goes to hell version. At one point, Ramirez leaned over the table. You think this could tie back to the old meth network? It already does, EI said, flipping open a photo of Blue from 5 years ago. And if he's running fentanyl now, It means he's not just surviving. He's expanding. The tension in the room shifted from professional focus to personal stake. They all knew my history with Blue, even if I never told them every detail. That night, I drove home through quiet streets, my mind replaying old footage, Blue's smirk when he thought he'd gotten away, the smell of the lab in North Carolina, Justin's face when the cuffs went on. There was a pattern here, a web that kept pulling familiar names and places back into my orbit. Part of me wondered if fate was just another word for unfinished business. The next day would roll out before dawn. I laid my gear out on the kitchen counter. Vest, sidearm, badge, radio. The ritual felt the same as it always did before an op, methodical, calming. Before turning in, I checked my phone. One new voicemail from an unknown number. My gut told me who it was before I hit play. It was my mother's voice, soft but steady. "Rachel, I heard from someone that you might be going after dangerous people again. I know you don't want to hear from me, but please be careful. I don't think I could handle losing you for real this time." I deleted it without saving. Not because it didn't matter, but because I couldn't carry that weight into tomorrow. In this line of work, hesitation is a luxury you can't afford. And tomorrow, there would be no room for hesitation. We rolled out at 4:12 a.m., the convoy of unmarked vehicles slicing through the pre-dawn darkness like silent predators. Charleston Harbor was still mostly asleep, except for the low hum of cargo cranes and the occasional echo of a ship's horn out on the water. Sarah drove point, her eyes scanning every intersection, every shadow. I rode passenger, radio in hand, headset snug. The rest of the team, Ramirez, Cho, and a pair of local task force officers, fanned out in the other vehicles. Porter coordinated from the mobile command unit parked a mile away, his voice clipped but calm over the comms. By 5:03 a.m., we were in position. The Green Falcon had docked an hour earlier, its hulking silhouette looming against the first hints of sunrise. Dock workers in reflective vests moved like ants along the pier, forklifts whining as they carted massive wooden crates to the waiting flatbeds. Our target was in the fourth container offloaded, a set of machinery crates with shipping labels so precise they looked like they'd been printed in a clean room. Hidden inside the steel casings, under false panels, would be the fentanyl shipment Crow had warned us about. I watched through binoculars as two men approached the crates. One wore a ball cap pulled low, the other, taller, had gloves on despite the heat. He moved with the kind of unhurried confidence that comes from knowing you're in control. "Visual on Blue," I murmured into the MIC. Sarah's voice came back immediately. "Confirmed." Moving into intercept positions. The plan was to let the loading start, then pinch the trucks just before they hit the north route out of the city. That way, would keep the operation away from crowded port traffic but still have the evidence secure inside the crates. But Blue didn't play by scripts. At 5:21 a.m., before the first crate even touched the truck bed, he turned his head toward the pier entrance, toward us, and gave the faintest smile. My gut tightened. Something was off. "Porter, he knows," I said into the MIC. "Hold position," a porter ordered. "Don't spook him into scattering." Too late. Blue tapped the brim of his gloves against the side of the crate twice, a signal. Within seconds, two more men appeared from behind the stacks of shipping containers, each armed, each scanning the pier. The quiet broke. "Go, go, go." Porter's voice cut through the headset. Sarah gunned the engine. swinging us around the side entrance as Ramirez's unit came in from the east. The first armed man swung toward us, weapon rising, but Cho's team pinned him with a hard tackle against the container wall. I was out of the SUV before the tires stopped rolling, sidearm up, shouting commands over the chaos. Blue didn't run, at least, not at first. He just stood there, that same infuriating smirk on his face, as if this was all a minor inconvenience he'd shrug off by lunchtime. But when he saw Ramirez cuffing his man and Sarah clearing the cab of the first truck, he bolted toward the far end of the pier. I chased him. Boots hammering against steel decking, the smell of salt and diesel filling my lungs. He ducked behind a stack of pallets, tried to cut left, but I closed the gap. We slammed into each other, my shoulder driving into his ribs, sending us both skidding across the slick wood. The fight was quick, ugly, elbows, knees, the grunt of effort. He tried to reach for something in his waistband, but I had the drop on him, jamming my forearm into his chest and yanking his arm behind his back. "Doc Blue," I said between breaths, "you're under arrest for trafficking controlled substances, conspiracy, and anything else I can throw at you." "Rachel Morgan," he rasped, almost laughing. "Didn't think you'd still be chasing me." "Guess I like unfinished business," I shot back, snapping the cuffs on. By the time we brought him back to the staging area, the pier was secured. The crates were being pried open by evidence techs, revealing the hidden compartments exactly where Crow had said they'd be. The fentanyl was packaged in vacuum-sealed bricks, each stamped with a Crown logo, Blue's signature. Porter stepped up beside me, hands in his pockets. "Nice work," he said, his eyes on Blue being loaded into the transport van. "Yeah," I said, but my voice was flat. Because as much as this arrest felt like a win, it didn't erase the years he'd evaded us. It didn't undo the damage done, to the people hooked on his product, to the families shattered by it. And it didn't change the fact that my own family's collapse had started with someone just like him. Sarah came over, brushing a stray hair from her face. "You okay?" I looked out at the water, the sun now fully breaking over the horizon, casting long gold streaks across the harbor. "Yeah," I said finally. "But this isn't the last chapter. Because in this business, there's always another name, another shipment, another storm on the horizon." And I was already looking for it. 2 days after the Charleston port takedown, I sat in my apartment with the blinds half closed, a mug of coffee cooling on the table beside me. Outside, the city moved on, joggers with earbuds, delivery trucks rumbling past, kids shouting in the distance. Inside, my world felt unusually still. Blue was in federal custody, awaiting transfer to a high-security facility in Virginia. The paperwork was thick enough to kill a small tree, and Porter had joked that if the justice system didn't lock him away, the bureaucracy would. For the first time in years, that chapter was closed. But closure is a tricky word. I thought about the expression on Blue's face when I cuffed him, not fear, not anger, but something closer to amusement, like he knew the game would go on without him. And maybe he was right. The players change, but the game stays the same. The news cycle barely touched the bust. A few local headlines, a short segment on the evening broadcast, a brief quote from a DEA spokesperson. No mention of the years of work it had taken to get here, no hint of the web that had stretched back into my own family's story. That's how it works. The public sees the arrest, not the miles traveled to reach it. The night after the op, I'd gotten another letter from my mother. It was shorter this time, the handwriting a little shakier. "Rachel, I saw the news about the port. I don't know if you were there, but if you were, I'm proud of you. I wish I could tell you that in person. Mom. I didn't respond. But I didn't throw it away either. It sat on the counter beside my badge for a full day before I filed it with the others in my desk. In the weeks that followed, life slipped back into its rhythm. The fentanyl case branched into new leads, some of which took me up the coast to Norfolk and others back inland toward Atlanta. I spent more nights in hotels than in my own bed. My go bag lived permanently in the corner of my living room, always ready. One evening, after a long day of debriefs, Sarah and I ended up at a diner just outside the city. It was one of those places with a jukebox at every booth and coffee that could strip paint. She slid a plate of pie toward me without asking if I wanted it. "You've been quieter than usual," Ishi said. "Just thinking," I replied. "About family?" I gave a half smile. "Always." She didn't push. That's the thing about the people I work with. They don't need the whole story to have your back. Driving home that night, I realized something had shifted. The anger I'd carried for so long, at Justin, at my parents, at the way they'd chosen to believe the worst of me, was still there, but muted. It was like a scar that had stopped aching in the rain. They couldn't undo what they'd done. And I couldn't rewrite the years I'd spent proving myself to everyone but them. But I could choose where to put my energy now. I'd found my place, not in the house I grew up in, but in the work. In the people who understood the stakes without needing them explained. In the quiet satisfaction of taking one more dangerous name off the board. And for the first time in 8 years, I was sleeping through the night. Not because everything was fixed. Not because the past didn't still have sharp edges. But because I'd stopped waiting for an apology big enough to make it all better. The truth is, that apology doesn't exist. What does exist is the knowledge that I'm still here. Still fighting. Still standing between the poison and the people it's meant for. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm a special agent with the DEA. And whatever comes next, whatever storm waits on the horizon, I'll be ready. Because I've already survived the one that should have broken me. And I'm not looking back.